Hope everybody is doing well. Thank you so much for joining us again today for another episode of our COVID-19 talks. Today, we're going to talk about something that's very interesting to me. Hopefully, it'll be interesting to you all as well. And that's kind of how infectious disease has impacted the community over the years. As I've read several articles over the last several weeks, I've learned more and more about how infectious disease has changed the way that we both live and the way that we work. So we have some leaders from the local architecture community, both on the commercial and the residential side. So on the residential side, we have Sara Martin. Sara, how are you doing today?
Great, Kenneth. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Sara's with Open Door Architecture. We also have, on the commercial side, we have Cayce Smith with Cope Architecture. How are you doing, Cayce?
Hello.
Good deal. And then on the commercial side, we also have Daryl Johnson from Johnson Architecture. How's it going today, Daryl?
Good, Kenneth. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you all for joining us. So very quickly, I want to let you all talk about your various firms and what you all do and specialize in. And Sara, we can start with you.
Okay, great. So my firm, as Kenneth said, is Open Door Architecture. Our slogan here is that every house needs an architect. So we specialize in all of those jobs that 99% of what we do are renovations. So a lot of what we do are design work for kitchen renovations, master suites, additions, screen porches, all those kinds of improvements that people like to do to their homes, whether they've just moved in or more commonly when they've been there for 20 years and now they're empty nesters and they want to change some things around. We do specialize in historic home renovations. So our favorite neighborhoods to work in are 4th and Gill and Sequoia Hills and Holston Hills and North Hills, and they're all called hills here in Tennessee because that's how it rolls in East Tennessee. But we love it. We live in a 100-year-old house this year, turned 100, and that's the kind of work we really chase. So we enjoy historic neighborhoods, historic homes, and making them work for modern living.
Awesome, awesome. Cayce?
Hi, I'm Cayce Smith. I'm the Executive Vice President of Cope Architecture. We're around a 20-person firm located here in Knoxville. And as Kenneth said, we primarily do commercial architecture. Most of our projects are publicly funded projects. So we do a lot of work for local governments, the county government, state government, and federal governments. I'd say our largest market segment that we work in is education. It's probably about 60 to 70% of what we do. So that includes K-12 education projects in East Tennessee and Central Tennessee, and also higher education projects. So we do a lot of work with the University of Tennessee and such.
Awesome, awesome. And Daryl?
Well, my name's Daryl Johnson. I'm with Johnson Architecture. We are a 23-person firm, and we just celebrated our 25th year last year. So been around a little while, and when I got started years ago, I had Sara's firm, basically. We did small additions and renovations to homes and some custom homes. But over time, as we took the company and began to try to diversify, we kind of spread our wings and really branched out into more private sector commercial work. So we will still do a house or two a year. It's not the focus of our firm primarily, but we still do churches and schools, a lot like Cayce's firm. We do some work at the University of Tennessee, the Knoxville Zoo. I have a background in entertainment design, so some of that has followed me as my career has progressed at Dollywood and the zoo and other areas around the region.
This is good. I'm learning some things about you all that I didn't actually know. So this will be good. Well, I'll tell you what, let's get right into it. And Cayce, I'll ask you the first question if you don't mind. So when I first came into the workforce about 15 years ago, the trend was starting just on the cusp of moving towards more open environments. Wanted to have more of an open workspace. And over the last couple of years, we've kind of seen that scale back just a little bit, but it's still been very prevalent. With architecture and the way that it's laid out right now, and with people thinking about infectious disease, do you see any type of change in layout formats of offices? And if so, what do you think that might look like moving forward?
Well, I think we'll have to frame our discussion in two phases. We're going to have an immediate response that companies can do in the near future. And by near future, I mean probably 12 to 18 months. And then in the looking a little further out and how things will change. In my personal experience, I've not seen a great decline in open office concepts. We still see that quite a bit. Your biggest risk factor there is going to be your air quality. That's how most infectious diseases are transmitted. And when you have the open air concept, you're recirculating a lot of air that a lot of people are breathing. When you have individual offices, you can contain that more. You can run it through more filters. You can have PTAC units. You've got a lot of different strategies that you can use to isolate the air that people are breathing. All of that adds a great deal of cost, though. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In classroom design, which is basically a small unit office, just like in an office complex, where when we're looking at a cluster of group of people in one space, versus an office concept where you've got one person in one space. Every time you add individual offices, you're adding operable doors that get touched by people. So I think we're going to start to see some, I know on the short term, offices are propping doors open and things like that so that people are not coming in contact with common doorknobs. Obviously, there's doors that you cannot do that for fire control and things like that. But for years, we've been putting automatic doors on entrances into retail spaces. I would see potentially perhaps an increase in that in office environments. Again, that adds cost. So that's something I'm very interested to see where people are willing to invest their money on different strategies that we can offer.
Okay. And Sarah, I was going to ask you a question next, but I would love to give both you and Daryl a chance to answer that question as well and get your take.
Yeah, about workplaces in particular, open office.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have been kind of following the decline of the open office environment in other arenas, like about work focus, productivity, communication styles, like all those other impacts that open office environments have. But yeah, it's such a mixed bag because like Cayce said, lots of offices is lots of doors, is lots of other opportunities to touch things. But open offices are people switching places a lot and sharing germs and all that kind of stuff. So what I have learned from homeowners, which I find is very interesting and probably pertinent to a lot of these questions, is that the important thing to do is it's almost a furniture fix, but just to have cleaning stations or cleaning little cleaning caddies or cleaning storage areas where you can keep all the stuff that you need to clean right there in plain sight, so that you're kind of working with the human nature of like, okay, is there something extra that goes on the desk or on the shelf or whatever, where someone, as soon as they sit down, they see the hand sanitizer, they see the Clorox wipes, like something. We architects want it to look nice, so maybe there's a product design opportunity out there for someone to create little cleaning kits that are integrated in the open work environment, so that like work with the fact that people have to sit at these tables and desks and like just clean them constantly.
Awesome. Daryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with everything that Cayce and Sara both have said. I do believe, the open office environment was an efficient concept to maximize the amount of people you could get into a certain amount of space. When you don't have to accommodate wall thicknesses and door swings and all of those kinds of things, it becomes a much more efficient, thereby cost-effective way of addressing a need for more people in a particular space. We began to see, in some of our corporate work, we began to see that changing slightly in terms of the way that it was used, primarily from an open collaboration kind of atmosphere. We began to see different companies moving toward a workstation, but then common areas amongst those workstations, in some cases very prevalent, to where people could break out and they could begin to interact with one another and collaborate on it in a greater manner, a greater experience than they normally would have had. I think that lends itself to some inherent problems, though. As Sara said, you're constantly looking at who touched this surface, how are we going to deal with that, how close are we to that person? So, and it kind of manifests itself down the line, even to our company, with individual workstations. Now as we begin to bring people back into the office, as we move slowly toward that, we may be looking at how do we begin to separate those areas between employees a little bit more. So that will ultimately begin to trickle down to more space required, which means renting more space or buying more space and finishing more space and cost associated with that. Add to that the HVAC issues, as Cayce mentioned, where now you're looking at air quality, a higher number of air exchanges per hour, and all of the other nuances that go along with trying to create. It's almost like creating a hospital environment, if you think about it, that could be cleaned on an ongoing basis, that has surfaces that are highly durable, highly cleanable. I think it's going to change pretty dramatically the way we look at things. I do think that there will be an immediate response, as Cayce said. There will be an immediate response. It'll probably be more severe than the ultimate response, maybe. But I do think that the new normal, is going to be very different than what we're used to.
Awesome. And Sara, I'm going to ask you a question that's pertained more towards an article that you and I shared with one another about residential locations, but obviously I want to hear Cayce and Daryl's thoughts on it from a commercial standpoint. And that has to do with hand washing. You all have all talked about touching things, and we know that touching things and touching our faces can be very dangerous in terms of the transmission of germs and eventually infectious disease. So, and I think the article that we shared it talked about the usage of vestibules and how that could change. So as far as hand washing, whether sinks or stations in homes, do you think that we're going to see any change in how we architect and design our spaces to be more accommodating to clean hands?
Yeah, definitely. I think sinks in and of themselves are just going to become so much more prevalent. Like now we almost think of extra sinks as a luxury thing, like, oh, 2 sinks at a vanity, a double vanity, or the bar sink in addition to the kitchen sink or the butler's pantry sink, all these kind of extra things. And they've almost been a hallmark of more luxury interiors. But sinks aren't all that expensive as long as you're not having to do some major plumbing work to fit them in. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in addition to homeowners asking for them in places like laundry rooms that they've always asked for, if they start asking for them in mud rooms, any like those transitional spaces that you have in your house, current homes that are built now in more modern neighborhoods, oftentimes people use the back door. And so that's, mudrooms have become so popular because people will park and go in the back of the house or through a garage entrance. And that's a real natural place for a sink. I, of course, specialize in these historic neighborhoods. And I think they also, everything old is new again. They also have like something to teach in terms of controlling infectious disease. The front porch has been an excellent staging area for us. Like, hopefully the new normal doesn't include Lysoling your groceries every week, but we've been doing that, and the front porch is one of those places where I can take up my shopping bags and spread everything out, and I've got plenty of space to like clean things before they actually enter my house. So, maybe that's an outdoor kitchen opportunity where we can put a little sink somewhere. And for houses, like our house is Craftsman and it's a little less formal where when you walk in, you are in the living room. But for houses that are a little bit more formal or have that front entry hall, I could totally see ornamental sinks being something that is a new trend. There are already so many gorgeous pedestal sinks that I can definitely see homeowners being interested in having that as something that is a creative opportunity for us to design a little bit of house jewelry into the front that is also functional. So yeah, I think sinks are going to be a big thing.
Well, about 15 years ago, I put a pedestal sink in the kitchen in my main bathroom, and it was so beautiful, and I was so happy to have it. And then as I was rearranging everything, I thought, where am I going to put all my products? So I didn't make the necessary arrangements to have things to put my rubbing alcohol and my shaving kits and all that stuff. So and I thought about that when you said that. Cayce, what do you see maybe on the on the commercial side in terms of how hand washing or sink stations could evolve as we move forward?
I think one of the places that will affect my firm the most is in our K-12 school designs. We're really looking at that. Currently, we'll do large toilet and sink areas as you go into the wings of the classrooms. We have historically looked at the sink placement from a safety standpoint. We'll often pull them to the corridor so that teachers can supervise hand washing. But I think that will become even more prevalent to encourage students to wash hands throughout the day, perhaps a sink station going into the cafeteria or any place that the kids will cluster and congregate. In the younger grades, we often put sinks in the classrooms, but as the children get older, there are not sinks in the classrooms. I think we might see that change.
And then, Daryl, what about you?
Our experience is probably more similar to Casey's than to Sarah's. I will say, though, that on some of the more public facilities that we work on, whether it's at the zoo or at Dollywood, we have, for a number of years, been looking at non-touch kinds of efforts, whether it's foot-activated hand basin, wash basins for hands with motion-activated, faucets, or other devices, automatic door openers and things like that. I think that was the technology that we're sort of already moving towards. So I think that there's probably a good basis of a start in place for that kind of effort. As far as the K through 12, same here. We've in most of the facilities we've worked on, we've moved the sinks out basically to the hallway, to an alcove. You do the best that you can there, but creating more non-touch types of environments, I think, is really the direction that we'll probably see going more toward on all facilities.
Well, Daryl, you actually led me exactly to my next question. So you named a couple of really popular ones, but I'll ask Cayce and Sara, do you all see any other types of devices, entryways, products that we may move to touchless? I think I read an article about elevators in different buildings that may go to touchless. Do you all see any other devices or products, equipment that may go to touchless as we move forward?
I think this whole pandemic has really sped up the trajectory that we were already on in terms of those things. There's actually the last time I stayed in Nashville, the elevator was operated by my cell phone. In the parking garage, I opened up the door with my cell phone. I didn't touch anything until I got to the actual unit. So the technology's there. I think we all just have to catch up with sophistication on how to use it.
Yeah, you're starting to see it more in residential. Kitchen sinks are the number one thing right now that people are interested in, those like touchless faucets where it's more like a commercial bathroom. And people have liked that. But for residential, it seems to me that the most pertinent place or the biggest opportunity for that kind of innovation is at doors, the entry doors to the house. So the front door, the back door, anywhere that you might have neighbors or salespeople or service people coming up, anyone that's not kind of in your quarantine that might have access to the house. So I think touchless entry there, or some other sort of, I don't know, just more kind of buffer spaces or stages that you can have to go through before you get in the house. I think that's where touchless is really going to be handy in the future.
Well, when we get off the recording, I'll have to ask Cayce where was this fancy hotel that she stayed at, because that I was at, I still had a key to get in my door, so I'm clearly not staying in the right places. So we talked a little more about how your respective firms have adjusted to working remotely. And that is something that I don't think is going to go away. I think there'll be obviously a gradual shift as people re-enter the workplace. But some companies will decide that remote work is for them now forward. That will probably one end of the spectrum. And then you'll have companies, I think, at the other end of the spectrum that will say, well, now we're going to have percentages of our employees that work remotely, or we're going to have options, or we're going to have certain days of the week that people can work remotely if they so desire. So, Cayce, I'll start with you. In terms of how you see maybe office spaces being constructed, or just different spaces that are designed, how do you think that we'll adjust those to work from home environments?
That's a complex question. I've discussed this with some colleagues, and one of the first suggestions was that office spaces could actually become smaller. And there's this trend in the market already for shared workspace. There are some companies that are going to AB shifts and sharing workspace in order to reduce the footprint that they have to maintain. But then you've got two people sharing physical space one day to the next. You'll have one person sitting at a desk on Monday and a different person sitting at that desk on Tuesday. So that presents itself a whole nother host of problems. I really think it's going to be industry specific on how that is handled. I don't think there's a exact perfect answer to that.
Yeah. Daryl, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, actually, I think it is very much industry specific. For example, my 29-year-old daughter works for an advertising and marketing company in Atlanta, and she works from home full time. They require a monthly meeting, or I think it's a bi-monthly meeting, to just kind of, I guess, go over where the status of where their projects are. But her life revolves around working at home. And when I do see her, she's on conference calls constantly. She's on Zoom calls or GoToMeeting. So she's constantly interacting. Now with architects, I think it's different. When we bring a young architect into our office, we couldn't immediately cut them loose and say, work from home. There's a lot of training, a lot of collaboration, a lot of mentoring that needs to occur before I think any of us would feel comfortable cutting somebody loose and saying, sure, just work remotely and, tell me when you've got this done, and then we'll take a look at it. I just think that number one, we owe that to them as employers, but number two, those documents that are being prepared are supposed to be done under our direct supervision. So there's a bit of a professional responsibility that we have when I think it comes to working remotely or working in the office. And we're fortunate right now, although we have 2 new hires starting in May, we're very fortunate right now that we didn't have that situation. Most of even the younger architects that we had were fully capable and had been with us for enough time that we felt okay with them working from home. So I do think that it's a little bit different in our profession, and we're going to have to shift and adjust and figure out how we can do that so that it doesn't impact the development of those young architects moving forward.
And then Sara, we'll ask you the same question, but the reverse, right? So as Cayce and Daryl talk about what it looks like on the office space side, for you, what do you think it might look like on the residential side?
Yeah, it really is going to require more of these kinds of small rooms, like I can imagine, or at least a small corner of a room. Like one of the challenges that I could not have foreseen before I had 2 young children is that a home office is great if you find space for it, but if it's in the middle of the house, like good luck getting anything done because your kids will find you. They will distract you. So that is it's something that like most houses have, that kind of leftover space. That's often why they call me, is they're like, hey, I have this room that's too big for a laundry, but not big enough for a bedroom, or maybe I was thinking about it being this or that. All those little needs that you have in a house, like a workout space, maybe overflow guest room, an office, like those are functions that can kind of share that kind of small leftover room. So for years on the home improvement television shows and all that kind of thing, you've seen this trend towards like open floor plan or more open spaces. And I have a feeling this will, at least in small part, reverse that trend where people are going to be looking for one little cellular room that they can close the door and keep their computer up. For years with our small house, we did a lot of our work remotely at the dining room table. And that kind of drove us insane because then you've got your dining room table cluttered all the time. So I can see the need for having to chop up or chop off a little part of the house and dedicate it to a workspace for a lot of people.
So one thing that I guess is common sense to most people, but I didn't really think about it until I read it, is that germs actually can live, or it's easy for them to just rest and live on flat surfaces. And so you have the natural things that you can do, Lysol and Clorox and all that stuff. You can clean off desks, phones, all those things on a constant basis to make sure that germs are not being transmitted from one person to the next. But I'll let either Daryl or Cayce help inform me. This is maybe just a personal question. What else can be done from a design and an architecture perspective to decrease the number of flat surfaces, or potentially make sure that those flat surfaces are maybe less, I don't know, less prone to germs and being able to live and reside and be transmitted on them? So I'll let either one of you go if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's kind of a different question, but one that sparked my interest.
I'm sorry, Cayce.
Go ahead.
That's an interesting dilemma. Obviously, as over time, as digital innovations have occurred more and more, the need for, say, layout space or flat surfaces, at least in our profession, have diminished somewhat. With that said, we still have a significant need for flat layout space. So creating spaces that are germ-free is a really interesting challenge, and I'm not sure I have an answer for it. I think that it's easier in some other instances, like in the medical fields, for example. It's kind of like we do a lot of restaurants, and restaurant owners hate flat surfaces because servers always put a picture on them. So we've sloped those kind of surfaces, but in a day-to-day environment where the work effort itself requires some level of flat surface, I'm not sure that, other than just addressing how you keep that surface clean, I'm not sure that there are a lot of other answers. Maybe there's something creative that you other guys have thoughts about, but I don't have much.
I agree. I think what it comes down to is the materiality of those surfaces, making sure that they are as non-porous as you can get them, and surfaces that can endure the harsh chemicals in cleaning that they'll undergo. Our largest horizontal surface is the floor. In our classrooms, we're going to be reducing the amount of carpet in our classrooms. We've got children rolling around on the floor for group time. That needs to be a non-porous surface that we can clean. Things like that. Our countertops, where a wood surface may not be able to withstand the chemical cleaning for duration of time, we'll have something a little bit more durable there. As Daryl mentioned, looking at these more from a hospital and medical standpoint in our design approach, I think we'll start seeing more things like that.
It's interesting that you bring up wood. I started to read an article last night, but I'm an old man, fell asleep before I even got into it. But I scanned it very quickly, and I saw where it talked about wood and the uses of wood moving forward. But I didn't get a chance to read it, but I'm sure that's what they were talking about, was potentially a reduction in using wood on some of them. That's a really good point. Sara, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, again, I think in the places where we can't necessarily solve it with the use of that space, because as Cayce and Daryl have both said, we need flat spaces and desks and countertops and all those kinds of things, flat surfaces. Maybe we need to take a note from the grocery stores, and now we've all gotten used to that, pull up the disinfecting wipe and wipe off the handle. Maybe, whereas now we have cable grommets and troughs and trays for our networking equipment, maybe we start adding little, like, there's a place to just have disinfecting wipes that you pull right out of the desk, and right when you sit down, that's the habit, you know. So some of it may be behavioral modification and cues rather than changing the hard installed surface itself.
So maybe I should get out of the IT business and move towards the disinfectant business is what I'm hearing. There we go. Got a new industry.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I want to just take a few minutes to just let everyone hear from you all. You know, I've kind of been asking questions, but you all have thoughts because you all live in this every day. You live it, you breathe architecture. Obviously, you're very passionate about what you do. So I just want to kind of hear closing remarks from each of you all in terms of ideas that you have, thoughts that you have, or if there's anything even positive that you want to say to people moving forward. I think the level of the unknown is slowly shrinking by the day as we become as the economy opens back up and we have stage phases that, hey, we know if we're good, do well for 28 days, then we can do this. So some of the uncertainty has kind of gone down, but just want to hear from you all from an architecture standpoint, any ideas or thoughts that you all may have, and then anything that you want to just say as we close out. Daryl, I'll start with you, and then we'll go with Sara, and then we'll let Cayce finish us up.
Okay. Yeah, I think this certainly has been a pretty significant monkey wrench in not only in our economy and in particular in the design profession, but I think in society in general. And I think without getting too, certainly not political or philosophical, I do think that architects as a group need to really band together and come up with some best practices that can be utilized across the board. You know, it's going to take a lot of creative people, many hours to figure out how best to address the way that we need to move forward as a community to design buildings that can comply with the safeguards that need to now be in place. I think this issue has always been there. Obviously, it was there in 1918. And I think that over the course of the last 100 years, the strides that have been made are you know, without equal. We have created environments and structures and design opportunities that are far and above, I think, a lot of our peers. Obviously, there are lots of great things going on in other countries, but I think America is still the cutting edge for really innovative design. What we find now is that the solutions, maybe we were all very naive in the beginning that solutions occurred as quickly as they did. Vaccines and all of those kinds of things that I think I know, I'll speak for myself. I took for granted how quickly those things occur and how intact our society was in terms of solving problems. And now we're in a position where no one has solved this problem yet. And I think we have to back up and we have to figure out how do we put the mechanisms back in place, not only in all of those other economic machines, but also in our profession, in the design profession. How do we put those safeguards in place that they become part of our normal everyday operating procedure? And a lot of them were already there. I don't think it's an insurmountable task, but I think it has to be on the front of our minds and not just an afterthought as we move forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Sara?
I have really been reflecting a lot on how my career and my work with older homes is so relevant now in this COVID situation. I live in an urban neighborhood. A lot of the historic neighborhoods are very, you know, small lot sizes, close houses, sidewalks, front porches, all that kind of thing. And the elements of that I have found myself being so grateful for are the stages of interaction that those spaces provide. So this is almost more of like a neighborhood planning or city planning kind of attribute or characteristic these older neighborhoods have, but I think we can carry that knowledge into you know, new neighborhood development. There's so many reasons that people already like that kind of historic neighborhood setup, but we keep saying how grateful we are that we live in this kind of situation right now during all this social isolation, because we've never really felt that isolated. Because of front porches, like when we go out on a walk in the neighborhood, you know, people have to use their etiquette to kind of like switch sides of the sidewalk and make sure that we're not getting too close to each other. But as I'm walking along, I've gotten to interact with so many of my neighbors face to face essentially, but 15, 20 feet away as they're sitting on their front porch and I'm down on the sidewalk. So those kinds of in between spaces like front porches have really been wonderful, almost like mental containers that we can use, where it's like, here's my safe space up here, you're down in that space, we have a separation, and yet we can still enjoy the human experience of connecting and, you know, being in each other's company, which has been great. So I think that's something, you know, it's another cue or another reason not to get rid of that, to keep it and let it keep bring us forward. And the other thing I'll say, just from a personal standpoint, I have been so thankful that technology for communication, like what we're doing right now on a Zoom call, had gotten to the level where it was in early March before this all hit. And even like curbside grocery delivery and, you know, all those other kinds of things that we're enjoying now. And they've certainly had to like rush and catch up with this new demand, but I am so glad that we had those systems available to us, because I don't think I would have fared quite as well in 1918.
Casey?
Well, I think the common thread in what all we're talking about is the human behavior and human relationship side of all of this. I think Daryl's right. The normal everyday operating procedures that we're accustomed to are going to change. And it's been really interesting to watch how people react to all this situation, and it'll be more interesting to watch as people come back into the workplace and how they're going to interact with one another. We're all social beings, and as architects, we design environments that create space for all these interactions to play out. So I have no doubt that we'll rise to the challenge, because that's what we do. We're architects and we solve problems. This is just definitely a new problem we've never seen before, but I have no doubt we'll be able to react, and our built environment will respond accordingly.
Well, I am certainly excited to see what the future of architectural design brings. I would be remiss if I didn't say one thing. On Tuesday, it was the first time that I put on slacks, and days. And so I was fortunate enough to go to a on-site and work with a potential partner. And I literally looked at my calendar and I said, let me figure out the last time I put on slacks. And I went back and I counted and I said, that event was canceled. That event was canceled. And I got back to March 11th. And Casey, that was the day that you and I went to Mexico.
That was the day it all went upside down. Yes.
That was the last time that I put on professional attire before this past Tuesday. So
we had a big industry gala planned for this weekend. Our AIA gala, of course, is canceled, and I have a beautiful dress that I will wear someday and hang in my closet.
Well, I was happy that my slacks still fit me. That was one for me. I guess I didn't get the quarantine 20. So, but thank you all so very much for your time. I know you all are extremely busy. I love hearing about people that are still working so hard and obviously employed during this very, very difficult time for so many. So thank you all again very much for for being here. And we look forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully sooner rather than later.